Beautiful song, David. Thank you. I will have to find out who actually sang that, I guess. So thank you for choosing to be part of this spiritual community today. We especially know in this time of virtual attendance and participation that you could be anywhere. So we're really grateful you chose to be with us today. And welcome back to anyone who attended last week for the first time for Melissa and Z, and then decided to come see what our normal Sunday program looks like. And also to each and every one of you who regularly attends. And anybody else who found us by whatever means. If you feel like it, you can let us know how you found us in the chat. Today, we're going to continue our dip into this month's book, The Art of Possibility, by Rosamund, Stone Zander, and Benjamin Zander. In this book, the authors list 12 practices that they suggest will open our awareness to greater possibility. 2 weeks ago, it seems like a year ago, I spoke about the first practice, it's all invented. And I referred to the 2 questions at the end of the chapter. The first question, what assumption am I making that I'm not aware I'm making that gives me what I see? And the question is not, am I making assumptions? Because we're always making assumptions all the time. But do I know? Am I aware? Am I conscious of the assumptions I'm making? And then once you at least have a tentative answer to that question, you follow it with the second one. What might I now invent, imagine, or create that I haven't invented, imagined, or created yet that gives me other different choices? This is the creative space of possibility that our science of mind philosophy encourages us to explore. Today's talk title, Who Makes the Rules, is a little more pointed and up in our faces, and it reminds us that we are the ones who decide what kind of world we live in. And so before you shut me out of your mind and turn off the Zoom gathering because your thoughts say the world is horrible, ugly, and mean, I'm going to ask you to stop and take a deep breath and ask yourself again, what assumptions are you making that you assume represent the truth? Who told you this? And why do you believe them? It's so easy to get wrapped around the axle and find ourselves led by our emotional reactions. It's so easy to imagine and get invested in there being good guys and bad guys that are outside of us, because that gives us an easy enemy, somebody to hate, and then we don't have to be responsible for our own actions and our own responses. Every time I find myself falling in that hole, if I'm paying attention, I can stop myself before I get too invested in that usually false or at best only partially true story. Sometimes I discover only after the fact that I've been fixated on something for the last several hours or even overnight, only to discover in the clear light of day that I bought into some garbage thinking that only had the tiniest bit of pseudo-truth attached to it. I know I'm not the only one that happens to. I want to remind you of a short story in 5 chapters that some of you will remember from Foundations class. It's actually by a woman named Portia Nelson. I'll paraphrase. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a very deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It's not my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. It isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. Yes, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it. I still fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. I know I did it. I know it's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Yay! Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. Most of us are not so tidy when we recreate the same never-ending, disempowering story. We get caught in a repeating do loop between chapter 2 and chapter 3. Oh, there's a hole. We see it, we know better, we pretend we don't see it, we step in it. It's not our fault, we did it on purpose. Oh dear. And we keep repeating the same old, same old, same old, because it's convenient, because it's familiar, because it's a habit, because that's what everyone around us is doing, or we feel helpless to create a different reality. Eventually, and sometimes it takes a very long time, we get tired of climbing out of the hole that we created for ourselves to fall in. And sometimes we lay there. And sometimes we choose a different street. Or we call in reinforcements and fill in the stupid hole. Or at least put concrete barricades around it and flashing lights, so we have to try really hard to fall back in. And it doesn't matter what the story is or what the stories are, because they are our creation. We did that. Nobody else can be responsible for the stories we make up. Doesn't it suck? Congratulations for being the author and creator of your life. Sometimes this is a very hard pill to swallow. We create the rules by which we operate our lives, or we agree to somebody else's rules, some set of rules that we think govern this thing called life. And we agree, consciously or unconsciously, it's the same thing. We choose the rules to play by, and they're all in those agreements. And it is all invented, and we get to invent what works for us. So think about some experience you had this last week, and you let that experience drive your actions, or your thoughts, or your Facebook posts, or your conversations, or your journaling. Any stupid story that you made up and bought into that appears to be outside yourself. Just think about it. I'll wait. Actually, we're all really lucky that we're not in person right now, because if we were in person, I might ask you to lean over and talk to your neighbor about your realization and your remembrance of who's actually in charge of your life. One bit of what I'll simply call bad programming grabbed me by the throat on Friday night just before I went to sleep. And I rolled around all night, fretting and worrying and fuming and just being upset about this stupid idea that I had picked up and I thought was true. And it took me until Saturday morning when I got up, turned the computer back on, and went looking for what was actually behind that story And it took me until sometime mid-Saturday morning to clear my head and see that story for what it was. Falsehoods, partial truths, or spin. I hate spin. There are people that get their jollies out of writing spin. And somehow they find it beneficial for me to spin right out. How stupid is that? But anyway, I bought into the story, lock, stock, and barrel, as the old saying goes. I fell in that hole and it took me a good 12 hours to get out, even though I knew I had done it. We make the rules we live by. It looks like we don't, because we live in this world of experience, conditions, and effect, but we most certainly do. We decide how to see what happens. And we don't react to what happens. We think we do, but we don't. We react to what we think about, feel about, or emote about what happens. I'm reminded of Byron Katie's magnificent 4 questions in her work practice. You know these. I like them so much, I talk about them often. The 4 questions. Is it true? Can you be absolutely sure it's true? Number 3, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And number 4, who would you be without that thought? And then her challenge, which is magnificent, is to own and honor the answer to that 4th question. And then look for other examples of who you were without that thought. How you presented in the world when that false belief was not activated, was not validated, or you didn't believe it like it was true. We have to be in charge of ourselves. Actually, we don't. We don't have to be in charge of ourselves. It's okay to be a victim if that's what you want. But I will say, life is much more pleasant when we feel like we're connected to and in control of ourselves and our choices, our decisions, and our experiences. So I have a story that I wrote in the story skills workshop that I'm taking right now. And it's an ancient story. It happened when I was in high school and I took driver's ed. I was not the teenager who was anxious to get the keys to the car. I wasn't. I had a terror of driving this 6,000 pounds of metal, like I was gonna, I don't know, hurt somebody or run away from home or something. So I had this very deeply ingrained terror of driving. And driver's ed was required for graduation. It was required to get a license at the time. So I took driver's ed. And of course, the first thing they do is they show you these gruesome movies about car crashes and blood and stuff. And so I was freaked even more about this driving thing. So I get in the car, and the teacher is one of the coaches at the school. And I'm in the driver's seat. I put on the seatbelt and I turn the key in the ignition. And if my muscles in my arms had been any tighter, they would have popped. And I'm glad that steering wheels are stronger than me, because I would have broken it in half. So the coach is in the passenger seat, and I don't know if he has a chicken brake or not. And the 2 students in the back seat are completely unaware that I'm absolutely melting down in the driver's seat of this car. But I am. And so we leave the parking lot, and I'm like shaking. I'm so terrified of driving. And the coach tells me to do something. And I sort of freak out, and I drive off the road and almost in a ditch. And the coach looks at me and he says, are you okay? And somehow I didn't cry. I don't know how. I said, not really. He said, back the car up, back up onto the road, and get in the back seat, and we'll let somebody else drive. So somebody else drove. Everybody lived, including me. We got back to the school, and the other kids got out of the car, and the coach said, wait a minute, I want to talk to you for a minute. And he talked to me about something he had just learned. And that was this new technique that he had learned from the Soviet athletes and their coaches, that if you visualized, if you imagined doing something successfully, that increased your odds of being able to do it. And so he told me in some detail what it would look like if I was to imagine successfully driving the car. And he got my agreement that I would practice that at least 20 times between that Friday afternoon and Monday morning. Because Monday I was going to get in the car again and I was going to drive, and it would be fine. Okay, so I thought, all right, I have nothing to lose, and I do have to do this because I do need a driver's license. And so I probably practiced it 50 times that weekend. Every time I thought to practice it, and every time I was afraid of driving, and every time in between all of those times, I imagined, I visualized myself getting in, putting the seatbelt on, turning the key on, and moving like I knew what I was doing. And so Monday, when I got in when driver's ed finally came in the day, and I got behind the wheel, and I felt okay, which is wildly different than Friday, right? And I think the kids in the back seat were the ones that lost the coin toss, because the story went wild, I'm sure, about this geek person, which was me, who was terrified of driving, and scary because, she almost put the car in the ditch. But I imagined doing it so long and so well that when Monday came around, I had changed my story. And I was attentive, you need to be paying attention. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't nervous. And back in the 70s, which I told you it was ancient, nobody was doing visualization. This was new technology. Not brand new, but it hadn't become widespread yet. And back in 1948, in the 48-week home study course, Ernest Holmes had written about visualization as a technique, but it hadn't made it into common usage yet. And of course, now everybody and their brother uses visualization for absolutely everything. So that's where we are in this world of being able to go from where we are right now to being able to imagine and visualize what's possible. So back to this book, The Art of Possibility. The second practice is called giving an A. What does giving an A mean? It means deciding ahead of time that the people we interact with deserve to be accepted and valued, and they don't have to earn the right to be considered worthwhile in our world. In the book, Benjamin wrote about how he applied this practice in an advanced class of musical leadership that he taught at the University of Southern California for the top 50 students out of 27,000. So this was the cream of the cream of the cream of the crop. He told the kids that they all started with an A, and then he described the requirement. See if this sounds familiar to you. Some of you have done something like this before. He wrote, sometime during the next 2 weeks, you must write a letter dated next May, which begins with the words, Dear Mr. Zander, I got my A because, and in this letter, you are to tell in as much detail as you can the story of what will have happened to you by next May that is in line with this extraordinary grade. In writing the letters, I say to them, they are to place themselves in the future, looking back, and report on all the insights they acquired and milestones they achieved during the year as if those accomplishments were already in the past. Phrases such as, I hope, I intend, or I will, must not appear. The students may, if they wish, mention specific goals attained or competitions won, but mostly I am interested in the person they will become by next May. I'm interested in the attitude, feelings, and worldview of that person who will have done all he or she wished to do or become, and so on. Is this a familiar practice to you? Maybe not by next May, but that positive thinking, that yes, now accomplished feeling. That's how we write and speak and practice affirmations. First person, present tense, active voice, juicy, meaningful language. What are you willing to claim and own as possible for you? And now, in giving an A, we extend this to others. What are we willing to allow others to become? How successful and accomplished are we willing to see others? Rather than that default thinking that says, I never do anything right, or I couldn't possibly drive a car, or they never do any right, or they don't know what they're doing, or whatever. What if instead we make space for magnificence to occur? And what if we actually intend for it to happen? What if we believed that and focused on that? In Marianne's newsletter article this past week, she used part of Marianne Williamson's quote from A Return to Love, the one that I used to feel was chasing me down the street, pointing and laughing. You know the one. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as little children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So Keith has scheduled his next book study. The one that he's in isn't quite done yet. It's getting close. But the next book study, starting in late September, is on Ernest Holmes' The Art of Life. Sweet little book. It's one of my favorites because it reminds us that we can view life and live life like it's an art form, not a struggle or a challenge or even a project. On page 41, Holmes writes, life says, I am this or I am that, and immediately this and that appear, beginning to take form according to law. Life always works in accord with law. It is intelligence plus law. It is law plus conscious volition. It is law plus will and choice. What's law, you ask? Yeah, I don't like this either. It's what we really believe, deeply and profoundly. We have this amazing, incredible feedback mechanism built in. We get to experience what we believe. And the coolest part of this is, if we discover we don't like what we're experiencing, we get to change our minds. We get to change our thinking. We get to change our point of view. We get to walk down a different street, and we don't have to fall in that same hole anymore. And we don't have to do it to each other either. We can create a new reality because life says yes. Law says yes. And then Holmes continues with the paragraph you probably expected me to read. Those of you that have been around a while know this one. Life works by direct affirmation. There is no other way for it to work. This is why we are told to be still and know that all things are possible to God. We are told to affirm, positively to assert, to declare this truth in the face of all apparent opposition, to claim abundance in the midst of poverty, to affirm health in the midst of sickness, to decree joy in the midst of sorrow, to announce the kingdom of God is here and now. Giving ourselves or another group of people unconditional A's, automatic A's, is evidence of enacting this statement. When we decide we have value a priori without having to prove it or solve it, which is a never-ending story, a situation that can never be conclusively proved, or that we give the same gift to another, we assume we recognize they have value. We make space for ourselves to achieve. We make space for others to become their greatest expression. The power of your word class is learning this, in learning to give spiritual mind treatments. We make space for each and all to have the best possible outcome and put our attention, intention, faith, and trust towards this end, and then not undo it by dismissing or disparaging or downgrading or downplaying ourselves or others. This is a high place to see from. It's a high mountain peak, and to live from. Emma Curtis Hopkins called this point of view a high calling. I don't know anybody who lives there all the time, but we can visit, and some people visit more often. And we all visit more often when we are intentional and focus our attention. I want to briefly mention the next two practices from the Art of Possibility before I close today. They are be a contribution and lead from any chair. We have to see ourselves as active contributors in our lives before we can change or take charge of our experience. By being calm and clear and bright, or alive, awake, and aware, we are always in a position to contribute to the greater good and to be a shining light regardless of our official position in the world. Shining our light most certainly gives each other permission, gives ourselves permission and each other permission to shine their light as well. So I want to close with a story from the Art of Possibility, called from the practice called Rule Number 6. I'm going to start with Rule Number 6 next week. The story goes, two prime ministers are sitting in a room discussing affairs of state. Suddenly a man bursts in, apoplectic with fury, shouting and stamping and banging his hand on the desk. The resident, the local minister, admonishes them and says, "Peter, kindly remember Rule Number 6. Whereupon Peter instantly is restored to complete calm, apologizes, and withdraws. The politicians return to their conversation, only to be interrupted again in 20 minutes or so by a hysterical woman gesticulating wildly with her hair flying everywhere. Again, the intruder is greeted with the words, "Marie, please remember rule number 6. Suddenly, she's completely calm, and she too apologizes and withdraws. When the scene is repeated a third time, the visiting prime minister looks at his colleague and says, "My dear friend, I've seen many odd things in my life, but never anything as remarkable as this. Would you be willing to share the secret of rule number 6? "Very simple," says the resident prime minister. "Rule number 6 is don't take yourself so seriously." "Ah," says the visitor, "that's a very fine rule." After a moment, he ponders. He says, "So what, may I ask, are the other rules?" "There aren't any other rules," was the reply. So bias yourself by your intention towards success for yourself and others. Engage and participate in your life as fully as you choose. And when you feel like you're taking yourself too seriously, remember rule number 6. Know you are always an example to someone, no matter what, no matter who, no matter where. Do this. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to close with the prayer. So hold that image of yourself, that highest good, that greatest possibility that perhaps you've been a little anxious about or a little skittish about trying. Some larger presence in the world that you wish to be, how you wish to present. Hold that thought in your mind while I speak the words. I feel so grateful to be present today and to be made aware once again of this possibility of an ever greater good, an ever greater life experience that's available to me and to each and all, everyone who chooses to remember that each lives as the divine incarnate, this whole and holy presence, this source of all wisdom and knowledge, this source of all power and all love, lives, moves, and has its being in each one. And so each one has all the power that they need to accomplish, all the options they need to achieve whatever wishes to be done by them. So I feel grateful to be able to remember this and to do my part to live it, to embody and enact it. And I know for each one who hears this talk and this prayer, but they also have the same opportunity. Each one has some expression in them that wishes to blossom. And I know the blossoming as magnificent, as beautiful, as extraordinary. And I know that each blossom gives the other blossoms encouragement to do the same. So I feel so grateful to know this and to be able to share this awareness and to feel what it feels like to live that experience. So I live in this space of great good, and I know that it happens without effort, struggle, or challenge, because each lives as their divine self all the time. Letting this truth be, I bless it, and so it is.